Welcome to podcast Inside the Mind. In today's episode, we will explore the psychoanalysis of the child, how a child's inner world is formed, how early experiences shape personality, and how unconscious processes influence emotional and behavioral development from the earliest years of life. Psychoanalysis does not view the child as a simplified version of the adult. On the contrary, it considers childhood as the foundational stage where the structure of the psyche is built. What happens in these early years does not disappear with time. It is internalized, transformed, and often reactivated later in adult life. At the core of psychoanalytic theory is the idea that much of human behavior is driven by unconscious processes. Children, even more than adults, express their inner conflicts indirectly through play, dreams, fears, symptoms, and emotional reactions that may seem irrational on the surface, but are meaningful when interpreted symbolically. Sigmund Freud was the first to propose that childhood experiences play a decisive role in personality development. He argued that the child's psyche is organized around instinctual drives, primarily related to pleasure, attachment, and security. According to Freud, development unfolds through a series of psychosexual stages, each centered on a specific zone of the body and a specific type of psychological conflict. During these stages, the child must negotiate internal tensions between desire, reality, and external authority, often represented by parents or caregivers. When conflicts are not adequately resolved, traces of them may remain in the unconscious, influencing later emotional patterns, relationships, and even mental health. One of Freud's most controversial but influential ideas is that children experience complex emotional attachments to their parents. These early emotional bonds are not purely rational or conscious. They involve ambivalence, rivalry, dependence, and desire. Psychoanalysis does not interpret these dynamics morally, but structurally, as part of how the psyche organizes attachment and identity. Later psychoanalytic thinkers expanded and revised Freud's ideas, placing greater emphasis on relationships rather than drives alone. Object relations theory, for example, focuses on how early interactions with caregivers are internalized as mental representations, what psychoanalysis calls objects. These internal objects shape how the child perceives themselves and others. From this perspective, the child's mind is built through relationships. A consistently responsive caregiver contributes to a sense of safety and continuity. An unpredictable or emotionally unavailable caregiver may lead the child to develop anxiety, defensive behaviors, or difficulties in emotional regulation. These patterns are not conscious choices, they are adaptive responses formed in early life. Melanie Klein introduced the idea that children experience intense emotional states from a very early age, including anxiety, aggression, and guilt. She argued that even infants engage in primitive forms of psychological defense, such as splitting, dividing experiences into good and bad, as a way to manage overwhelming emotions. Over time, healthy development involves integrating these split experiences into a more balanced and realistic view of the self and others. Donald Winnicott emphasized the importance of the caregiving environment. His concept of the good enough mother challenges the idea of perfect parenting. Winnicott argued that children do not need flawless caregivers. They need caregivers who are sufficiently attuned to their needs and capable of gradual, tolerable failures. These small frustrations help the child develop resilience and autonomy. Winnicott also introduced the idea of the transitional object, such as a blanket or toy, which helps the child navigate the transition between dependence and independence. This object occupies an intermediate space between the inner world and external reality, illustrating how children use symbols to manage emotional separation and growth. Play occupies a central role in child psychoanalysis. Unlike adults, children rarely express their conflicts through verbal reflection. Instead, they communicate through play, drawings, stories, and imagination. In psychoanalytic terms, play is not merely entertainment, it is the child's primary language. Through play, children reenact experiences, work through anxieties, and express wishes that may not be consciously accessible. Psychoanalysis does not aim to correct behavior in a superficial way. Its goal is to understand the meaning behind symptoms. A child's aggression, withdrawal, or fear is not viewed simply as a problem to be eliminated, but as a signal of internal conflict or unmet emotional needs. It is important to clarify a common misconception. Psychoanalysis does not claim that parents are to blame for all psychological difficulties. Rather, it recognizes that development occurs within complex relational systems shaped by social, cultural, and emotional factors. Psychoanalysis seeks understanding, not accusation. In contemporary psychology, psychoanalysis of the child is often integrated with findings from developmental psychology, attachment theory, and neuroscience. While some classical concepts are debated, the central insight remains influential. Understanding the psychoanalysis of the child allows us to see childhood not as a passive phase, but as an active process of psychological construction. The child is constantly interpreting, adapting, and internalizing their experiences. What may appear insignificant to adults can be deeply impactful for a developing mind. In conclusion, psychoanalysis offers a framework for understanding how the foundations of personality, emotional life, and relational patterns are established early in life. It reminds us to understand the adult mind, we must first look at the child, not only as they behave, but as they feel, imagine, and unconsciously experience the world. This was podcast Inside the Mind. Thank you for listening.